Okay, cool. So this is going to be another round of the fourth Arthuria mock debate tournament. For this round, Arco is going to be taking the position that a hot dog is a sandwich. Amethyst is going to be taking the opposition. As always, we will base the winner upon who concedes. If no concession is made, we will put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can vote on who you think performed better in the debate. You guys will have 40 minutes for this round, and you may get started.
Amethyst, do you want me to go first because I'm making the positive
Yeah,
claim?
yeah, you can go first.
Okay, great. So for today's proposition, I am holding that a hot dog is a sandwich. When we make the statement that a hot dog is a sandwich, we are making a truth statement. That is to say, it is true that a hot dog is a sandwich. The relevant question is, in what sense is it true? It is my belief that it is true in a categorical sense, like the taxonomy of the animal kingdom. Sandwich is a category with several subcategories. We can have subs, open-faced, deli-style Reubens. All of these are sandwiches. The question is, what is ubiquitous in all sandwiches? And I think that there are three relevant features. One, it must be framed by bread. Two, it must have ingredients other than bread. And three, it is typically eaten with the hands. A hot dog is framed by a hinged loaf of bread, so it fits the first criteria. The ingredients inside is a sausage of some kind that is made of meat or a meat imitation, and the meat is framed by a hinged loaf and is typically eaten by the hands. So it fits all three requirements. In these three ways, a hot dog is categorically a sandwich. The nature of a hot dog being a sandwich is an analytic truth. Like triangles are three-sided shapes whose internal angles add up to 180 degrees. If an alien species came to Earth that only ate light, say, and if we told them what a sandwich is, and if they understood all the terms in that statement, just like if we told them what a triangle was, they would agree with us on what a sandwich is. And if we pointed out that a hot dog is not a sandwich, they would laugh in our face for contradicting ourselves in the same way they would laugh at us if we said that toast, square toast cut diagonally across, does not form triangles. In this way, I hold the proposition that a hot dog is a sandwich is true.
Okay, so I like to first say that according to the Oxford Dictionary, an item of food consisting of two pieces of bread with a filling between them, eaten as a light meal, is the definition of a sandwich. See, we have to have these requirements for it to be considered a sandwich. So atomically, if you look into the analogy of a hot dog, it is therefore not a sandwich. Firstly, a hot dog does not consist of two pieces of bread. Therefore, it ruins that one. Secondly, at many family events, such as barbecues, it is not eaten as a light meal. It is eaten with things such as chips or fries in whatever American's case. It is eaten with other things as well. Therefore, it is not commonly eaten as a light meal. It kind of distracts from the main point of what a sandwich is. So therefore, according to the Oxford English Dictionary and many other dictionaries, it is not a sandwich. I'll go into more depth on why it is not a sandwich and what it actually is later in my argument. I mean, if you just want to, just go on any things you want to branch off of what I said or what you said, I mean, go ahead.
Sure. Is that the finish of your opening statement?
Yeah, for now.
So
yeah.
you said that it has to be two pieces of bread. So do you think that, let's say there's a loaf, like a sub loaf, and it is cut, but it's not cut all the way, so that there's still that little hinge left. Is that not a sandwich then?
Well, it depends on what specifically you're talking about. Are you talking about?
Are you familiar with the restaurant Subway?
Yes, yeah.
So at Subway, they bake a loaf of bread. It's like a foot long or whatever, and that loaf of bread they cut inside of it, but they don't fully cut it. It's not two pieces of bread. It's one piece of bread that's connected by this hinge. Would you say that because it is not two pieces of bread, that sub is not a sandwich?
Well, when we think of a sandwich, we have to bring it back to the Oxford English Dictionary or any other dictionary that you'd like to refer to. And we have to think about the fact that does it meet these requirements?
Yeah.
If you go to a Subway, a common kind of term for this thing is a sandwich. But I think any employee, any person, any spokesperson for Subway does actually call their products a sub, not a sandwich. Now,
But it's called a
if it
sub
is a
sandwich,
sandwich,
right? Like we could go to the Subway website, perhaps.
it might be called that. Yeah, you might be right on that. However, that's a good point. But if you branch off of this, having a hot dog and then having a something that is specifically designed to be called a sandwich is completely different things. If you think about it, you're comparing a hot dog, something that's completely designed on its own without reference to a sandwich, to something such as
Like a
things, oh
sub.
god, something such as subs, which are specifically designed around the idea of a sandwich, then we have this idea that, of course, it's a sandwich because it branches off the idea of a sandwich. A hot dog does not. There are many
Well,
classifications of a sandwich. So therefore, if an owner of a company wants to say, well, we make sandwiches, it's kind of respectful and kind of, well, not respectful, but kind of, it is classified as a sandwich.
well, that's sort
However,
of
hot
my
dogs,
argument
they
here.
don't.
That's sort of my argument here is that we have different classifications of sandwiches. So, like, for example, with the sub, we would call it a submarine sandwich, but for practical reasons, we just shorten it to sub. And colloquially, we'll call it a sub and say, can you get me a sub? And we know what that means. But it's never in question that a sub is not a sandwich just because we have a specific term for it. That specific term, sub, is more of a practical usage. But categorically, we would acknowledge a submarine sandwich as a sandwich. We just call it a sub. I don't see why that wouldn't apply to the hot dog. It seems to me that if a submarine sandwich is a sandwich because it is a hinged loaf with ingredients inside of it, a hot dog is also a hinged loaf with ingredients inside of it. And because they are equal in type and the way that they're framing the food, it seems to me that it would be a case of special pleading to acknowledge a sub is a sandwich and a hot dog is not.
Okay. I would like to bring up, obviously the maker of the hot dog, it goes years back, and honestly, I don't think we can specifically say who invented the first hot dog. So obviously we cannot say that. However, I'd like to bring the attention to an organization called the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council. Now, this, if I just find it a second. Oh God, why have I lost things on a 3-page document? Okay, I'll just explain it in my own words. This organization puts polls out and researches into stuff around hot dogs and sausages to see if they're safe, to see what's actually in them, and making sure they're regulated. This organization also puts in things such as polls such as, is a hot dog a sandwich? When asked, most people agreed with me in the fact that it is not a sandwich. So this organization came out with this statement. Our verdict is a hot dog is an exclamation of joy, a food, a verb describing showing off, even an emoji. It is truly a category unto its own. Limiting the hot dog's significance by saying it's just a sandwich is like calling Dalai Lama just a guy. Perhaps at one time its importance could be limited into forcing into a larger sandwich category, but that time has passed. By saying that, we see that because hot dogs were invented with no sandwich in mind, because it had no idea of sandwich in mind, it does not fill in the category of a sandwich. Now, we can go into many classifications, like branching off your point, we can go into many classifications on what is a sandwich. I agree with you there. But can I just ask, if you wouldn't mind answering this, where did you get your classification from in your opening statement? Because you said there were 3 requirements, or?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the way I came up with it, it was a sui generis, which is I looked at many different definitions of a sandwich. I looked at what people are calling sandwiches, all of these things, and I tried to find the relevant features. So these 3 things that are ubiquitous it's a definition I came up with on my own to talk about like the ontology of the sandwich. So I don't necessarily have to appeal to an authority here, but we can appeal to certain authorities if we like. But I think the important part is how we're viewing these things, the categories of what makes a sandwich. And we can agree that there's a component of bread. You already said from your definition, it's 2 slices of bread. You agreed that a sub is a sandwich. And now when we talk about the National Sausage Hot Dog Council, what have you, what they're trying to say is that because a hot dog is such a unique type of sandwich and it is recognized as its own type of food, it therefore is in a category on its own. I don't agree with that statement. That's like saying that a person that is so famous and so unique and exemplary in humanity is no longer a human because they are so unto themselves powerful or eminent or great. I think great men are still humans. I think a great sandwich, like a hot dog, is still a sandwich.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer branch off your point here and say this is a paragraph of my own. This is what I meant by the point. By condensing it down to such a label, such as a sandwich, which is what they meant, we ignore the significance of what a hot dog is. Hot dogs are one of the most important foods out there. Now, that's a bold statement for anyone to make, but we have to realize this: hot dogs is signifies a bringing together of families, such as events of 4th of July events. I mean, I didn't celebrate that this year, but it is a massive thing for families to come together and enjoy this food. Now, I don't think any other food, I mean, burgers maybe, but obviously barbecues, different celebrations, all year round these go on. These events, we all gather to enjoy this food. And by condensing it, saying, well, this is just a sandwich, or this belongs to a group called a sandwich, we are ignoring the cultural significance of just such a food.
Oh, well, I mean, in a cultural setting, I wouldn't go and argue with people that like hot dogs are sandwiches because there wouldn't be any utility in doing so. The point of barbecues and 4th of July is to hang out and have great fellowship. And in such a case, the debate of a hot dog being a sandwich, that debate would really just be about having fun or entertainment. But in this debate, when we're talking about hot dogs or sandwiches, we're talking about the qualities of this food that would make it a hot dog or would make it a sandwich or would make it distinct. I don't see any good reasons to distinguish a hot dog from a sandwich in a categorical sense. I could see good reasons to use the term hot dog at a party versus sandwiches so that it's clear what type of food I want someone to give me from the table. But that is more like using someone's name at a party to identify them. Like I would say my partner's name to get their attention rather than say their mother's name trying to get my partner's attention. There's a behavior there that I'm trying to access. I want to get the attention of one person in particular. So if I want to access a food in particular, I'm going to use a specific label that would give me access to that food. If there's 2 things on the table competing, like the hot dog, or like you say, the traditional sandwich of 2 slices of bread with deli meat and lettuce and all of that inside of it, I would say, please bring me a hot dog because that is a more specific label to the food that I want. But just because I use the label there to get a type of behavior, it doesn't deny the hot dog being a sandwich quality. It is still a sandwich in the categorical sense when we're defining these things. It just happens to have a specific name, and that name is shortened. We wouldn't say hot dog sandwich, for example, or sausage sandwich. Hot dog is very quick, brief. It has the utility of what I want at the party. But in this debate topic, we're talking about like the ontology of hot dogs, what it is that makes a hot dog. And I think that the bread, the ingredients inside, the function, usually eaten by the hand, those things are important. You brought up the function of this cultural aspect. I'm not denying that by asserting this other categorical sense. I think those things can work in tandem. There are cultural rules, you could say, about using these terms. Like at a party, the hot dog would if I say give me a hot dog, I would be getting the type of food I want. It's not a rejection of it being a sandwich when I do that.
Okay. I just want to bring you, this is something that you specifically said. You said that if there was a hot dog and a sandwich on a table, you would signify to someone saying, oh yeah, I would like the hot dog. Can I ask you, in that same situation, if you asked that person to go and get you a sandwich, what would they bring back? Would they have to
If there's
ask
a
you?
hot dog, if there's a hot dog on the table and a sandwich on the table, they would, if
Yeah.
I said bring me a sandwich, they would bring me the sandwich.
Okay. So what if there
But
is
I
two
want
sandwiches
to
on
be
the
clear.
table?
I want to be clear here. This gets in the realm of being a conflation because the words we're using have a different utility when we're talking about please bring me an item on the table versus the words we're using when we're talking about the being of a hot dog or the being of a sandwich. They're different arenas. So the language games that would take place would have different outcomes. So even though the person would always bring me the sandwich rather than the hot dog, that does not entail a hot dog not being a sandwich in terms of its properties.
Okay, so we bring up this idea of it being classified as sandwich. Now, obviously, we can see by that explanation that most people in their minds don't think about your self-claimed the ontology of hot dogs. Most people do classify hot dogs as not a sandwich.
Do you
According
have data on that?
I do. According to, again, the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, which is an insane thing that exists, but still does exist when I did my research, the pollen reveals that Americans aged 18 to 34, 64% said that they think that hot dogs are not a sandwich. And aged 35 to 44, 61% said the hot dogs are not a sandwich. This, however, in this counterparts, people over age 65%, 44% said they believe a hot dog is not a sandwich. See, this means our opinions are changing over time. See, these opinions, obviously, with older people, they grew up in a much different time. What this time has to represent that hot dogs are sandwiches and hot dogs are not, I would like to find out. But one thing I probably can tell you is that Southerners say that 62% of Southerners that were surveyed said that, oh, sorry, I need water. 62% of Southerners surveyed said that a hot dog is not a sandwich, while 58% of Northerners and 58% of Westerners. I think you and me can agree that Southerners are more religious. Southerners are more patriotic. Can we agree on that? I think there's polling going into that. I'm pretty sure you can look into that.
I don't know if I would say they're more patriotic, but I would grant that they're perhaps more religious.
Well, basically, you would agree that they go a bit more out on 4th of July events, yeah?
I'm not sure if they do or not.
I'm pretty sure if you go look into the polling that hot dog consumption would be higher in the South.
Oh, well, that just, but
Wise.
that's not necessarily related to like religion. patriotism. I just think, you know, Southerners tend to eat way more meat in general, and
Okay,
hot
but
dogs are a form of eating
on
meat.
your
So
own point, we can see that people who eat hot dogs more often agree
mhm.
that a hot dog is not a sandwich. So, do we agree with the fact that people who eat hot dogs more often see as it as not a sandwich? Do we rely on them more because they have more
I would
experience
say
with
I would say no, because I grew up in the South, and in the South, they call every soda Coke. It can be Sprite, that's Coke. It can be Diet Pepsi, it's Coke. Everything in the South is Coke. Every soda, sugary Coke, every sugary soda is Coke. The same thing happens with medicine. If we talk about an ibuprofen versus Tylenol, even though their properties are totally different and have totally different functions, they are all called they're all called Advil or something like that. In my house, we said Tylenol. Do you want a Tylenol? Then the next question is, what kind do you want? I have Advil, I have Excedrin, I have Motrin. But the point is, the way that people are using the language doesn't answer the question of what the being of that medicine is, what the being of that soda is, what the being of a hot dog is. So just because people in the South are going to say, no, hot dogs aren't sandwiches, and just because they eat hot dogs more than other people, does not make them the authority on what the being of a sandwich is and a hot dog. I think that's more relevant to the realm of philosophy, what we're talking about right now. And I think we need to
Okay.
consider the relevant properties of what makes a sandwich and what would distinguish it from a hot dog.
Okay. Can you just once for me? Why do you think Southerners then have a higher percentage of people that agree that it is not a sandwich?
I'm not sure why they would agree it's not a sandwich. I think for them, they're classifying a sandwich as something like two slices of bread with stuff in between it, and it's a very narrow definition. However, I'm not convinced that Southerners are spending a lot of time categorizing what a sandwich is, what the properties are of a sandwich. What they're
I
doing is they're
don't.
just using they're in a perpetual state of the barbecue, that we talked about the utility of using these words. So at the barbecue, for them, a sandwich is just getting a sandwich to eat, or for them, getting a hot dog is just getting the hot dog to eat. They're not talking, the content of that statement has nothing to do with the ontology of sandwiches and hot dogs. It really is just a utility. So when they're asked the question, is a hot dog a sandwich? They're answering that question from the realm of the utility of those words, not the ontology of hot dogs here. So I think it's a mistake to assume they're answering about the properties of a hot dog being a sandwich in that survey, because they're answering the question from the perspective of the utility there.
Okay. Oh, I just found the. Okay, I'll bring this up because I've been asked. I forgot to say this earlier. Established in 1994, the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council conducts scientific research to benefit hot dog and sausage manufacturers. So basically, this is a reliable source. So I like to go into the realm of, you have stated your specific ideology of what a sandwich is. Now, I just want to let you know, can you remind me of that and everyone of that
Yeah,
criteria?
I think the three criteria are: it must be framed by bread, it must have ingredients other than bread, and it is typically eaten with hands. When I say ingredients, I assume everyone acknowledges edible ingredients. I know some people might be pedantic and be like, oh, so if you put nails in it, is that a sandwich? That's not what I mean by ingredients. But
Okay.
those are the criteria: framed by bread, ingredients other than bread, typically eaten by the hands.
Okay. So you believe in the existence of a sandwich, an open sandwich, like the open sandwich, which is one slice of bread with a thing on top, and it's basically split in the middle. That
Yeah,
exists as a
sure.
sandwich, right?
I would say
Okay,
that's a sandwich,
so
yeah.
I'd like to ask you this. A calzone, do you think that is a sandwich?
A
It meets
calzone.
your criteria.
Is a calzone eaten by the hands? I usually cut it with a fork.
Usually
Also,
it is eaten by the hands. You
the
can do that.
the ingredients inside of it are more like a soup. It's all the sauce. It's like a curry inside.
It's usually
I'm
to
not
do with
sure I would
pizza
call something that has
kind
a
of stuff
curry
like that.
inside of it that's framed with bread a sandwich. Like I wouldn't call a bread bowl with soup inside of it. I wouldn't call that a sandwich per se, because it's not something that's easily
Okay.
eaten by the hands here.
Okay, well, if we say that this particular calzone is basically what you'd find on a pizza, it's not an actual soup of like whatever that, it can be cleanly eaten in the hand. Is that then a sandwich?
Well, does it fit the other features there?
It
It
does,
can be
yeah.
eaten by the hand.
It can be eaten by the hand.
Well, is it bread? Because isn't the calzone dough that's baked with the stuff inside of it?
It is basically bread, yes.
So when I say it's framed by bread, I don't mean that the bread has all of this stuff inside of it. So, like, for example, there's a type of French bread called fougasse, where you bake a loaf of bread with things inside of it. But in that case, the fougasse is not a sandwich, it's a loaf of bread with these other ingredients inside of it. So, whenever we have a calzone, these things are being cooked together. So, I don't see the calzone as a sandwich because it's not these separate things being brought together. It is baked together, is created together as a unit. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a sandwich, but I would say it has a family resemblance to a sandwich. It is framed by bread, you could say, because the bread is surrounding the ingredients inside. But the relevant difference here is that it is baked together as a thing, a unit by
Okay, I'd
itself.
just like to say that that was not in your original definition. Changing the ideology that you first entered the argument, not the argument, the debate with, is not really relevant if you're going to exclude an argument from one another while apply it to such a thing.
I'm not changing my definition. I'm clarifying the notion of framing here, because framing is not specific yet. So if I'm adding on to what I mean by framing, differentiating between like a fougasse where the food is baked inside of it, I wouldn't say that fits the idea of framing here. And we can clarify what I mean by framing if you like, but I'm not changing the premises here. I'm just adding clarity to the meaning of the words inside the premises.
Okay. So I would like to bring your attention to, I'm not sure if you have this in America, but in Britain we have, well, you probably do have this. We have something called beans on toast. Now, because these are two technically slices of bread, and technically these are open sandwiches by your definition earlier, is that not a sandwich?
Well, if you eat the beans on toast by hand, I would say yes. But if you're going to like slice it like you would say steak, then I wouldn't necessarily call it. I mean, the question here is it typically eaten as like an open face sandwich? If so, it's a sandwich. If it's typically eaten where you cut it with a knife and fork and you eat it like, a dish of some kind with utensils, then I would say it doesn't fit a sandwich here.
Okay. Okay, I would like to bring attention to something called, this was an article published recently in which it was a debate, and I'd like to bring a point added to the debate. And this was when they brought up the idea of an open-faced sandwich. Via an international approach, it is not a sandwich at all. The open-faced sandwich is a plate-bound horror. I'm going to skip that part. Open-faced sandwiches also provide lots of sauces on them, and honestly, a lot of these times they are not edible with the hands, and that is internationally called a sandwich. So by international standards, what makes your definition now of a sandwich that you have made in this argument, what makes that different? Why have you gone against an international agreed that we can all agree this is a sandwich?
Wait, I don't necessarily grant that that's the international standard. What is the international standard, and why should I trust that that's the international standard?
Okay, so the open-faced sandwich is something in where two slices of bread are used but yet split apart. However, sauces are usually added on these, and things like chili can be added on these, and they are still granted as a sandwich internationally.
But what is
By
what does that mean, granted internationally? Like people accept it as a sandwich, or they
most
don't think
people,
it's a sandwich?
most dictionary definitions do understand that this is a sandwich.
Well, I wouldn't say that's necessarily an international standard. So whenever we talk about definitions, like definitions are describing a use, the way a word is used. But the definition isn't answering the question about the ontology of a sandwich. Those are different questions. So when we're talking about, like, the definition says this, the definition of a sandwich is this other thing. That's not answering the question of what are the categorical properties of what makes a sandwich. It's just describing how people use a word typically. And when we're saying that those things aren't equal to sandwich, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. That it's not
Okay.
acknowledged as a sandwich. The open toast, the toast on that is not called a sandwich. Like, it just seems to me if you're going to argue via definition, there's some interpretation that takes place, which is here's the definition of this, here's a definition of that. We put those things together, we see they don't mean the same thing, therefore they're not. But that's not a standard, that's interpretation of definitions. So I don't understand how that becomes an international standard.
Okay, I think most self-proclaimed, I want to, sandwich ontologists do agree that an open-faced sandwich exists and sources can be used in sandwiches. Go ahead. Open-faced sandwiches are mostly eaten by utensils, but I like to move on from that point.
Okay.
Of course, we do know that the definition is not the be all end all of what is a sandwich and what is not a sandwich. I agree with you there, but we have to look at definitions as a base level. Of
Yeah.
course, we cannot say that, oh, the definition, this is it. No, but we have to see that if I think about 90% of dictionary definitions specifically say that hot dogs are not sandwiches, if you look at them for maybe 10 seconds, then we can interpret that we should start thinking about, is a hot dog a sandwich or not? And then we bring
Well, I
it into
don't
this
think
idea.
usually when I look at dictionary definitions, they're only saying what is a sandwich. They're being clear about what is a sandwich. Whenever we see something like a hot dog is not a sandwich, that's more in the realm of debate outside of the dictionary. So whenever we're talking about, you pointed out we need to look at the dictionary, but the dictionary is doing exactly what I did by setting up these properties. So for example, your Oxford Dictionary had these two criteria. One, it's between two slices of bread. You've already shown that an open-faced sandwich is still a sandwich, even though that does not fit your Oxford definition. Now, the second part of that was that it's a light meal, but I don't think that that will hold under criticism. So if we look at sandwiches and light meals, if it becomes the whole meal, like let's say that you have two slices of bread and it's just a really big sandwich, big enough that it is the entire meal, does that now become no longer a sandwich because it's not a light meal? Because it would fill you up and provide all of your macronutrients and everything? Is it no longer a sandwich just because of its size? I would find that to be a silly position to hold, to say that it is no longer a sandwich just because it's a full meal. People
Okay,
eat
well,
sandwiches as a full meal all the time.
yeah, I agree with you.
Okay,
Obviously, I say past
my
explanation that it's not the be all end all of this. So we've seen that basically you came into this argument, this debate, saying that this is what I go by doing this. And when I've challenged you on those things, um, sometimes you've been unable to back it up, such as
wait,
open face
where was
sandwich.
I unable to back it up?
Well, if we explain that open face sandwiches are sandwiches, which you stated before at the beginning of the argument, it does not go by your definition.
Wait, when did I say that? I never conceded that.
Well, obviously, when we understood that utensils needed to be used.
Right. Typically, if it's
Most of the
typically
time.
used that way, like for
So
example,
then it's not a sandwich.
a smothered toast, I wouldn't consider, like if I were to take spaghetti, like spaghetti sauce, and cover the bread in spaghetti sauce and then eat it, with utensils. I wouldn't call that a sandwich. But if you were to take some spaghetti sauce and just put it on top of that, and then I could carry it around and eat it, I would call that a sandwich. Now,
Okay.
that's not being unable to answer your question. I'm being clear there on the difference.
Okay. I'd like to move on and bring on another idea. This idea was brought up among the community, and it's called the cube rule of food. And I'm not going to be sitting here and say this is the most reliable source.
I'm
However, this
familiar
was
with the
made by
cube rule of food. Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, this was made by the idea that it is called the sides of starch. These ideas were agreed on as pretty much everybody who was in on the debate on Twitter, and it didn't have that much opposition of anyone who actually looked into it.
Right.
So I like to
Well,
just bring on the idea of it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the cube theory of bread is really silly because if you follow the cube theory of bread, then wraps are sushi. And if you follow the cube theory of bread, burritos are calzones. If you follow the cube theory of bread, and I'm trying to remember what all the options are. But just the notion that something would be called sushi, what we would call something else, that seems untenable to me. It's not even the same properties of sushi.
Okay, so we bring up on this idea.
What idea?
So of course this was agreed on as a community, and although this sounds crazy to you, you're also arguing for a side that a hot dog is a sandwich, which we've agreed on that most people disagree with you. So I don't think you can really take on an argument that things
I don't agree.
are
I
crazy.
never agreed most people disagree with me. All I agreed to is that the data you pulled up, they use that word in a different way than I'm talking about. I made the point that because they vote that it is not a sandwich, they're not voting on ontology there. They're voting on how the word is used. If I were to get in a room with them and I were to explain the meaning of all my terms and the categories of what makes it a sandwich, I'm fairly confident I would get them to agree that that is a sandwich because it fits all those criteria. They just haven't thought about all of these criteria. They're using it based on the utility of the language in their world. This goes back to the notion that they're in a perpetual barbecue. They're not in the realm of understanding the ontology here. They're perpetual barbecuing. So that as an authority of what makes the ontology of a hot dog is not relevant here.
Okay. So you just said the authority of what brings on the idea of a hot dog. Although you might be researched, I just bring on the idea that you as a man are not an authority on what a sandwich is and what is not a sandwich. You can bring on an idea of what a sandwich is. However, it cannot be internationally recognized because you do not have enough credentials. My sources are purely based on dictionary definitions. Again, the READ company that we discussed earlier, the NHDSC, and also experts on what an actual sandwich is. Yours is based on research
I don't
of
grant
over
they're
an hour.
experts. I don't grant they're experts. There are no there isn't this idea of
These
like
are
a
scientific.
field of
These
science.
are
No,
people who
those are people who are
search
part of the
scientific.
National Sausage and Hot Dog Association. Their job, all that research and stuff is all based on making hot dogs safe and then having these fun little research things as part of advertising. It's an advertising ploy. That's not scientific research. That's marketing research. Those people being experts aren't something that I'm going to grant as experts. Now, the second thing I want to address is you pointed out that because I'm a man and therefore I'm not an authority on this. I never claimed because I'm a man, I'm an authority. So I think bringing that up is not relevant to what we're talking about. I feel like that's a red herring. Now, the other thing I want to point out is I'm not making the claim that I am the expert on hot dogs and everyone ought to follow my opinion. What I am making a claim is that we can describe hot dogs in a categorical sense using these properties. And I'm putting forth that these are the relevant properties for what we should be defining something as a sandwich. Now, my job is to get people to agree with those being the relevant properties. But you haven't disagreed with those being relevant properties here.
Okay, so I have when I brought up dictionary statements and when I literally
But those
said
dictionary statements that you brought up do not fit how we are talking about hot dogs. So that dictionary statement from Oxford, if you're saying that is more appropriate for the standard of how we're judging sandwiches, it fails. It failed when I pointed out that we call an open-faced sandwich a sandwich because it requires 2 pieces of bread. It fails
but
when I
you're
pointed out
also
that the
saying your
side
also definition also failed when we
where
put that to the
We're,
test.
we're actually out
where
of
did it
time.
fail?
We discussed. Okay,
You
closing
haven't shown
statement.
where it
You can go
failed.
first.
You haven't told me where it failed.
So do
I
you,
Closing statement,
clarified the
guys,
Arco.
term.
guys, do you each just want to do your closing statements because we're out of time?
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Sam. I couldn't hear you.
I mean, you started first, so I mean, go on.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter to me. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I mean, you can go first if you want.
Okay, give me a second to write down some thoughts.
Okay. Can we play some Japanese music in here? Yes. The person was just typing chat. Oh, I've been eating water the entirety of this debate. I very much agree. Hot dogs are in fact donuts. Who knew?
Wait, sorry, is one of you giving closing statements?
I mean, Arco's
No, I'm just
doing.
taking a second to get my thoughts down.
I think
Oh,
it was
sorry.
a mental second as well.
Okay. So I'll start my closing statements now. The question of this debate is about the truth of this proposition. A hot dog is a sandwich. Now, when we're using the verb is here, we're not asking the question or answering the question. A hot dog as a word is used in a different way than the word sandwich is used. We're asking about the being of a hot dog, the ontology. So when we point to something like, oh, there's a hot dog on the table and a sandwich on the table, and if you ask for a hot dog, you're not given the sandwich, that's only pointing out that we use words in specific ways. That is not addressing the question of the being of a hot dog. When it comes to what the nature of a hot dog is, what it is composed of, what its properties are, we have to have different criteria other than popular use. So I propose that criteria are these 3. It's framed by bread. The framing there can be many different things. The point of this category is to be a broad category, like the category of mammal. There are many different types of mammals. There are whales, there are wolves, there are apes. All of those are inside the mammal taxonomy there. In this way, framed works in that way. It is framing this whole discussion of what the bread is doing there. It's framing the ingredients. It must be framed by bread in order for us to consider it to be in the category of sandwiches. 2, it must have ingredients other than bread. And by ingredients, I mean edible ingredients. So if bread framing nails, that is not a sandwich. But bread framing something edible, that is not bread. Let's say like a hot dog, we would call that a sandwich. Now, the ingredients there also, I want to point out, we're not talking about a soup there. Suddenly, that makes it difficult for us to eat the sandwich, which is why the third part is relevant. It needs to be typically eaten with the hands. There's a function to a sandwich. The bread is framing the ingredients as an edible container. We hold it in our hand and we eat it. These things are essential. These 3 things are essential in order for us to define the category of sandwich here, the ontology of a sandwich. What is a sandwich? A hot dog fits all of these things. A hot dog is framed by a hinged loaf of bread. The hot dog has ingredients that are not bread, that being a sausage. Those things are typically eaten by the hand. You go get the hinged loaf of bread, you put the sausage inside of it, you eat it with your hand. If you are to say a hot dog is not a sandwich, then I think you must say a sub is not a sandwich. If you do not grant those things both not being sandwiches, then you're special pleading. For logical consistency, you must hold that a hot dog is a sandwich. If you agree with those relevant features for the ontology of a sandwich, then a hot dog is a sandwich. So this is an analytic truth. Just by understanding the meaning of these properties in the claim, we know what a sandwich is. It is not relevant to how people use it in the world. It is not relevant to whether alien species eat it or not. We understand the meanings of these properties in these terms. We know what a sandwich is. The hot dog fits those features. So categorically, yes, it is true. A hot dog is a sandwich.
Okay. So at the beginning of this argument, I bring up the Oxford English Dictionary definition of what is a sandwich. Obviously, we've gone over it and we realized the hot dog does not fit this argument. Obviously, we've gone over this is not the end all be all, but I think we can all agree nobody is going to look at a hot dog and say, hey, that categorically is a sandwich. Now, we can have all different what ifs in this argument, but overall, we can clearly see that as a society, we've moved past the fact of having an idea of what is a sandwich. Grouping foods, as we've seen, is completely ignoring the significance of them. And honestly, it brings up an idea that itself is just a sandwich. And obviously, we've gone over that. Ooh, I need a drink. We as a community have come up with a rule, and it does not include this. The National Hot Dog Association has agreed that they are not a sandwich, and the Oxford English Dictionary has agreed that it's not a sandwich. Therefore, we as a society do not need to listen to one person's definition to categorically identify what is a sandwich. Three rules can be made up very easily about any given item on what classifies it as that item. However, it's the same things. We can all agree that a hot dog is nothing like the properties of what we think a sandwich is. And many organizations and dictionaries agree. So if you agree with that statement, hot dogs are not a sandwich.